will rise a whopping 20 to 25%, and co-payments and deductibles for millions more. If there was ever a war on seniors, this bill, Trump Care, is. The bill spends almost twice as much on tax cuts for the wealthy compared to tax credits to help older middle-class Americans afford health insurance. The rich get $592 billion in tax cuts for the richest, compared to only $361 billion for the middle class and the working class to afford health care. So when Speaker Ryan says it's an act of mercy, yeah, for those people who make over $250,000 a year, because they get big tax cuts. The only winners in this CBO report are the health insurance executives and the wealthy Americans. Everyone else gets a cold shoulder from the Republicans in Congress and from President Trump. Now, you remember when President Trump was a candidate? He said everyone will be covered and costs will go down. We now know that he had no intention of keeping either promise. Today, the nonpartisan scorekeepers have spoken clearly. Trump Care means higher costs for less coverage. The CBO report should be a knockout blow for Republicans in Congress. They should heed this warning and turn back from their plan that would be a disaster for the country.
And at the same time, you're seeing the report that they are taking $170 billion from Medicare, shortening the life of solvency for Medicare by 3 years. So again, seniors have a lot to lose, as do all of America's families. Any questions?
What would you say to Republicans who might try to discredit the validity of the score?
Well, this is their appointed, as the distinguished leader has said. The CBO director is one who is appointed by the Republicans. The CBO report is one that the Republicans have always demanded of us when we had the majority, and we would pass a law that you must have a CBO report. So as I say, they're torn. Some of them are trying to pin a rose on this report and make it sound like it's a good thing, and the others of them are trying to discredit the CBO. But it's completely wrong.
Yeah, it's a pattern that is disturbing, even alarming in this administration. When they hear something they don't like, they label it a lie. CBO is virtually unassailable. Everyone, Democrats and Republicans, whether it be George Bush, Barack Obama, or anyone else, has gone along with CBO. They appointed this person. He was supposed to be a conservative person. Unfortunately for the Republicans, he's an honest person, and they won't be able to discredit this. This report is going to resound from one end of America to the other.
Yeah, his Health and Human Services Secretary said today, we vehemently disagree with the CBO score.
And of course, he has no facts to back it up. Numbers are quite eloquent things, you know. They speak very clearly. And we all respect and have acknowledged that we need to know the numbers, the number of people affected, the amount of money that it will cost, who wins, who loses in that equation. And as I say, in Congress, they still haven't come to terms with criticizing the CBO because 24 million people losing health insurance is not a problem for them. It's an act of mercy.
I'm sure the Republicans regret that they can't fire the CBO director as easily as they fired 46 U.S. attorneys.
What about the idea here, and I want to direct this specifically, since you said this was a knockout blow, but I'd be interested to hear from both of you here.
It should be.
It seems as though that they're not making ground on getting their members to support this. It seems like this might have been a knockout blow even before the CBO report.
Well, look, we should know the truth. Before we enact major legislation, we should know the truth. CBO speaks the truth. They've been speaking the truth for decades. And to try to attack CBO is simply attacking the messenger. Let them address the real issues that CBO reveals. And the reason they don't want to do it is because the report is so devastating.
And when the American people see I tell this story about a little boy in school, and he's in first grade or kindergarten. Teacher says, what is 1 and 1? And he says, 2. 2 and 2, 4. She said, good. He says, not good, perfect. Numbers are very eloquent. And what you can only do is project here, because we're talking about the future. But as we have all know, you really cannot go forward to write legislation unless you have the numbers and you know what you're talking about. And it's for they, as I said to you the other day, the Speaker was the one who signed the letter insisting that we have a CBO report before we proceeded with the Affordable Care Act, which we did and we had already written for it. But when it was important then, now the Republicans are saying, oh, it's not so important now, and who's that anyway? Who's this Congressional Budget Office anyway? It's somebody appointed by the Republicans to do the numbers and to come as close as possible to what the impact will be on the American people, on their health, and on our budget. The whole purpose of all of this, Affordable Care Act and the rest, was to improve coverage, lower cost, and expand access. Affordable Care did exactly that. This does the exact reverse. It narrows coverage to the tune of 24 million people, decreases the quality of benefits according to the actuarial report in the CBO report, as well as costing more for people. So it doesn't achieve anything it sets out to do. It's a clear message to their constituents as to how it's going to affect them. Let's see if they get the message, or if once again they have a tin ear that says the only thing that really matters to us is for us to give tax cuts to the richest people in our country, and it doesn't matter to us who suffers.
Senator Schumer, can Senator McConnell get this bill passed in the Senate?
Well, if you look a little hollow, remember their criticisms of us? Read the bill. They had no time to read the bill. CBO issued its report 3 weeks before any committee voted on Affordable Care Act. And so I think Senator McConnell's going to have real difficulty. His mainstream Republicans don't like it because it cuts back on Medicaid. And remember, Medicaid is for poor people, but it's also 60% goes to people in nursing homes, and that affects not only them but their kids. You're a kid, 45 or 50, your mom or dad's in a nursing home. You could be kicked out after this bill passes. And what would you do? Maybe you have to take them at home. Maybe mom or dad has to stop working to take care of them. Maybe they have to shell out thousands of dollars out of their pockets. So it's a loser. And what about opioid coverage? So many of our Republican senators have made a campaign, justifiably, of trying to get more opioid coverage. Since Medicaid covers opioids, this is trouble there. And then you have our conservative Republican senators, Casey. You have the conservative Republican senators who think that this bill goes, too far. So Senator McConnell is got a very, very difficult job behind him, ahead of him, and he only has the bill to blame, not anything we're doing. Democrats to a person are not voting for this bill in the Senate. He's got to get the votes on his own. They asked for that when they did reconciliation, and the bill has made it extremely difficult for him to do it.
I'd just like to say, I think that the leadership in the House and the White House as well have made fools of some of our colleagues in the Congress by demanding that they write this bill in committee up all night, overnight, and all the rest of it without seeing a CBO, a Congressional Budget Office report that was imminent, was a matter of days away. Why, wouldn't you ask, why couldn't they wait a few more days so people knew what they were doing, instead of going into the dark of night without any basis of knowledge of what it would cost, who would be pushed off of care, and the rest? That really was a disservice, I think, to their own members and, of course, to their own constituents as well.
And one other point, the CBO says the costs go up by, the health care costs for those on ACA goes up about $1,000 in the first year or two, then it starts going down. It does start going down, but it's almost certainly because the plans that will be offered are so skimpy that even after year one, the amount of money the average person has to pay out of his or her pocket for health care will go up, because these plans that will come out later have higher deductibles, higher co-pays, less coverage. One more. Yes, ma'am.
Both of your campaign committees have been using this score as an issue against candidates in 2018. What do you think the political fallout will be on the health care debate in 2018 midterms?
Well, let me just say this. It's an irony of irony that the place that probably this most affect is the heart of red Trump vote areas, rural areas, poorer areas in many of the red states are most affected. If you go to states where some of our senators are running for re-election but have been won by Donald Trump, ACA all of a sudden has become popular. And that's because people realize by losing it, they're going to be in real trouble.
It is really a sad thing, because in addition to what the senator said about those who are in red states and rural America who have largely benefited from the Affordable Care Act and who are on it and will be pushed off, a lot of the benefit of the $600 billion will go to blue areas, and that's just not right. It's not right, but think of yourself as a Trump voter in West Virginia or someplace, or Kentucky, which has really done a good job with the Affordable Care Act too, and thinking I'm going to lose my coverage, and they're going to give $7 million to each of the richest families in America every year instead of giving me health care. Is that what I voted for? I don't think so.
Thank you, everybody. Thank
Madam
you.
Leader, there are some who would argue that you lost the speakership over health care.
All right, we're going to continue to watch this little news conference.
Well, let me
Looks
just
like
say
they're
this.
wrapping up. I want to quickly go to Mark Preston. Mark, how much of a setback is this Congressional Budget Office report to the Republican effort to repeal and replace Obamacare?
Well, it's something that they were expecting, and it's not very good, Wolf. That's why we saw the Health and Human Secretary come out today and say that he doesn't believe in CBO. The bottom line is right now, Republicans need to find a way to come up with some figures that will battle against that CBO estimate that shows that we're going to see more people ballooning that will be uninsured by 2026.
Is it a deal cruncher?
Well, it complicates what they're trying to do. The Republicans, of course, trying to make this happen fast and convince people who are on the fence, a lot of Republicans, both in the House and the Senate, that this is something worth doing. This is something worth risking their political future on. So I think these numbers complicate that. I mean, the deficit numbers are pretty good for them, but the idea that millions more will be uninsured compared to what would be uninsured now are problematic, as are the fact that seniors might pay 5 times more than they do now.
Stand by, everybody stand by. We're going to have much more on the breaking news right after this.
Choose to go, to indulge your curiosity. Explore a new road to see where it takes you. Meet the leaders who change the game. No matter where you are, no matter what the currency, when you run the numbers, they may surprise you. But stay your course. You're on the path to success. CNN Money.
Erin Burnett out front. Stories that matter.
You've got the money and you've got the passion, but how do you actually make a difference?
From the people making headlines.
Did you and Donald Trump talk about his Muslim plan?
To wherever news breaks, Erin is there. One-on-one. In the field. And around the globe.
What makes you believe you can accomplish that sort of growth?
Erin Burnett out front. Weeknights 7 Eastern on CNN.
Happening now, breaking news, 24 million. New numbers just out of the Republican health care plan. A nonpartisan government analysis says it will result in 24 million more people uninsured by 2026. Can the bill make it through Congress? Burden of proof. The deadline arrives for the Trump administration to produce evidence supporting the president's claim he was wiretapped by President Obama. Does any proof exist? Reality distortion. The White House tries to change the meaning of wiretap as top Trump officials appear to walk back Mr. Trump's explosive charge. What does the president really believe? And bracing for impact. A major winter storm is closing in on the Northeast. 1/3 of the U.S. population is being warned to prepare for blizzard-like conditions. States of emergency are already in effect. Who will bear the brunt of the storm? We want to welcome our viewers in the United States and around the world. I'm Wolf Blitzer. You're in the Situation Room.
This is CNN Breaking.
Senate Intelligence Committees, but both White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer and Trump's senior advisor Kellyanne Conway, they appeared to be walking back the president's charge against the former President Barack Obama. Tonight, the White House isn't saying whether any evidence to support the claim will be produced. And more breaking news tonight. More than 100 million people in the Northeast are bracing for severe winter weather. Warnings are up tonight from Washington to Boston and beyond, with some areas expected to see up to 2 feet of snow or more. We're covering all of that, much more this hour with our guests, including Democratic Congressman Jim Himes. He's a member of the Intelligence Committee, and Republican Congressman Ted Yoho, a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee. Our correspondents and expert analysts are also standing by. Let's begin with the breaking news on the Republican plan to repeal and replace Obamacare. Our congressional correspondent Phil Mattingly has the very latest for us. Phil, the numbers are now out.
That's exactly right. And 4-word summation I just got from Senator Bill Cassidy, a Republican from Louisiana, a doctor, somebody who's deeply involved in health care negotiations. Obviously, it's a concern. There's no question about it. These numbers are higher than Republicans were expecting, even as they expected bad numbers to begin with. And they set down a new pathway, a more difficult pathway, as they try and get all of the votes they can to actually move this plan forward.
So we disagree strenuously with the report that was put out.
Tonight, GOP leaders are facing a new reality. A Congressional Budget Office projection that shows a drop in coverage for 24 million people by 2026.
The Republican bill pushes 24 million people out of health care, off of health coverage. This is a remarkable figure. It speaks so eloquently to the cruelty of the bill that the Speaker calls an act of mercy.
As the president and his supporters try and maintain a sense of urgency.
The fact is, Obamacare is a disaster. And I say this to the Republicans all the time, by repealing it, by getting rid of it, by ending it, everyone's going to say, oh, it used to be so great. But it wasn't great.
President Trump today meeting with people who say Obamacare hurt them, acknowledging that the process to repeal and replace won't be clean or easy.
More competition and less regulation will finally bring down the cost of care, and I think it'll bring it down very significantly. Unfortunately, it takes a while to get there because you have to let that marketplace kick in.
Just 24 hours after his point man said this.
I firmly believe that nobody will be worse off financially in the process that we're going through, understanding that they'll have choices, that they can select the kind of coverage that they want for themselves and for their family, not that government forces them to buy.
But Republican sources tell CNN the new CBO numbers are certain to create a problem with the more moderate members of the party. The reason? The provision to repeal Obamacare's Medicaid expansion. which the bill sets at 2020. Conservatives say that's not soon enough, and a powerful outside group, Heritage Action, continues to push outright opposition to the bill.
Any conservative member of Congress who stands strong and insists that we use this moment to repeal the architecture of Obamacare, to fully repeal it and then replace it, will never regret the courageous stand they take in the coming weeks.
But it's the moderates, both members of Congress and some governors, who may become the bigger problem, sources say. The CBO's coverage drop is expected to be driven in large part by the removal of the Medicaid expansion program. The continued splits driving some to call for House Republicans to slow a train that is on its way to a full floor vote as soon as next week.
I would say to my friends in the House of Representatives with whom I serve, do not walk the plank and vote for a bill that cannot pass the Senate and then have to face the consequences of that vote.
The president himself aware of the tenuous political situation Republicans are now in.
The press is making it look so wonderful, so that if we end it, everyone's going to say, oh, remember how great Obamacare used to be. Remember how wonderful it used to be. It was so great. It's a little bit like President Obama. When he left, people liked him. When he was here, people didn't like him so much. That's the way life goes.
And Wolf, in talking to Republican officials and some of these statements we've seen from Republican leaders, their perspective is this. Look, we were going to remove the individual mandate. We were going to put an end to the Medicaid expansion program. And by design, based on the CBO's models, the coverage numbers were going to drop. They believe providing choice, providing better care options is better than providing insurance for as many people as possible. But that is a tough argument to make going forward. We've already seen the Democrats attacking on this issue. And the big question now is, how do they overcome or get by this bad headline number as they move forward with this process? Wolf.
Great questions. All right, thanks very much, Phil Mattingly. Up on Capitol Hill, Republicans, they're touting the savings of their plan, estimated at more than $330 billion over the next decade. Our senior White House correspondent, Jeff Zeleny, is joining us. So, Jeff, what's the reaction there to this nonpartisan analysis?
Well, so far, that is the number that they would like to highlight, that budget deficit savings of $337 billion over 10 years. That's why you are not hearing, at least for now, the White House attacking the CBO as they did a week or so ago, because they do like some things in this. The top line headline, though, of the number of the millions of Americans who would not be insured is certainly not helpful for this. But a senior administration official says that they are sticking with this. They still believe in the overall goal of this, and they hope they can get some of those outside conservative groups online with this because of that cost savings. So they aren't necessarily as concerned about their right flank as they are about the Senate still. The Senate is still a big concern for them. But, Wolf, this is something that is going to be a huge issue going forward, because health care is something that affects every single person. You can look at this CBO report and see how much an exact premium would go up. And these are hard headlines to combat. But the White House is sticking with this, and they believe that the overall savings is helpful in the long run, and they believe competition would come to this. But the reality here is, Wolf, this is a worse CBO report than they were expecting even a few hours ago here at the White House.
Yeah, that's why Chuck Schumer, the Democratic leader in the Senate, he's saying Trump care, he's calling it Trump care, he says, is a nightmare. All right, thanks very much, Jeff Zeleny, at the White House for us. Let's get some reaction from Republican Congressman Ted Yoho of Florida. He's a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, but this issue is obviously very, very important to you and a lot of Floridians. Let me put some numbers up on the screen and get your analysis, get your reaction. Before Obamacare took fully effect, in 2013, 41 million without coverage. After Obamacare, 28.5 million without coverage. The CBO, this nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, now says over the next 10 years, if the Republican repeal and replace plan goes into effect, 52 million people would be without coverage. So you support that?
I don't support those numbers. I think the way we're going, if you look at what's going on right now, the Affordable Care Act is going to collapse on itself. And if you look at the CBO numbers historically, you know, when they first came out and scored the Affordable Care Act, I think they had it scored at $800 and some billion, according to Jonathan Gruber, who helped craft that. But the real numbers are about $2.6 trillion. So they're a couple $1 trillion off. And then if you look at the numbers that CBO estimated would be there by 2016, there'd be over 20 million people signed up on the Affordable Care Act. But if you look at reality, it was less than half of that.
Because their numbers right now is, if this goes into effect a year from now, 14 million more people would be without health insurance.
I'll get to that.
And I suspect, Congressman, a lot of them would be in Florida.
I'll get to that. But if you look at the numbers, CBO said there would be 20 million people, or 20 to 24 million people.
But this is a new CBO leadership
I'm going to get to that.
named by Tom Price when he was chairman of the Budget Committee. He's now the Secretary of Health and Human Services, led by a Republican, highly respected. And you're saying what? You don't respect his work?
No, Tom Price, I really
No, I'm talking about the new head of the Congressional Budget Office, named by Tom Price, a Republican, to lead the Congressional Budget Office.
Right, but if you look at the numbers, they were wrong on the numbers. And if
that was a different team. This is a new leadership.
I realize
They're
that.
led by Republicans.
But if you look at the numbers that they said we're going to pay for it, there was going to be almost 9 million people, and it's only 6.8. So these numbers that are being projected now, that's going to come out in the pudding. If you just were to do what we were doing with the Affordable Care Act, there would have been a lot of people lost their insurance just because of the collapse. Aetna was pulling out. The other companies were pulling out. People were going to lose.
Well, let me ask you this, because the White House says they welcome the numbers in this CBO report. I've gone through the whole thing when they say, and this is music to your ears, that if the Republican plan goes into effect, it would reduce the federal deficits by $337 billion over the next 10 years. You like that part of it?
I love that part.
Yeah, so why do you like that part, but you're willing to reject the other part? Why is that number accurate and the other number is not accurate?
I think the biggest thing is if you look where we're going to be 5 to 10 years military, 5 to 6 years now, just the interest on our debt is going to equal what we're spending on military. There is no money to run government. We have Puerto Rico at hand in 5 to 6 years. I just got a report a month ago that said Social Security was going to have a 25% cut across the board. We can't continue going down the way we're going.
President Trump says, and he made a strong commitment many times, he will not touch, he will not reduce spending for Medicare, Medicaid, or Social Security.
He said
you
that.
believe him?
No, I believe he said that, but I don't agree with him. No, not at all. We don't have a choice. Mandatory spending has to be dealt with.
So he's going to break that commitment?
He's going to have to address mandatory spending, or mandatory spending will address what happens in the United States, just like you see in Puerto Rico, Greece, Spain. You know, Puerto Rico is cutting from 156 government agencies down to 45. They said if you've got a retirement check coming from the government of over $2,000, they're going to cut it to $2,000. That's going to happen here.
So what's more important, cut spending, reduce the deficit, or increase the number of people who have no health insurance?
Well, you've got to look at all of it. Well, if you can't just do one or the other, you know, CBO doesn't have figured in there the bump to the economy with tax reform, with the growth in the job sector, with manufacturers coming back here, more people going to work. If you look
None
at
of that has even been introduced yet. None of those proposals.
Yeah, but you can already see it in the economy. Look at the stock market. Look at the.
I haven't seen any tax reform initiative announced. Nothing is being discussed. At least he says the president has said, and the Republican leadership in the House, your leadership has said, first do health care and then we'll do tax reform down the road. So that's going to be a while before you can do tax reform.
Well, it's going to be a while, but it'll get done, and I truly believe it'll be done within the next 2 years. The majority of this, you're going to have the repeal and replacement that every Republican ran on.
And you're a good Republican in the House of Representatives. You're working hard for your constituents. Tom Cotton, Republican, former member of the House, now a senator from Arkansas, he says, you know what, if you guys manage to get something through in the House, it's going to die in the Senate. You only have a 52-48 majority. There are at least a half a dozen or a dozen Republican senators who don't like various aspects of this, and that's going to undermine your ability to be the majority after 2018. 2018 if you pass this in the House, but it collapses in the Senate. That's what Tom Cotton said.
That's what Tom, I heard him say that. If I was a soothsayer, I could go one way or the other on that. I can't predict the future. All I know is if we continue down the path we are on, the Affordable Care Act will implode on itself. People will be without insurance. It would be imprudent.
Why not
it would
take
be
your time and
irresponsible.
come up with something? Work with Democrats, come up with a compromise that not only could pass the House, but will pass the Senate as well, because you probably will be able to squeak something through the House of Representatives. You got a much bigger majority there, but it probably will die if it stays the same.
Well, that's going to be the choice of the
Democrats. You have no
senators.
Democrat support.
But there's been meetings in the conferences, in Energy and Commerce, Ways and Means. They've had bipartisan meetings in those committees. It gets voted out of the committees. What the Senate does is up to the Senate. I have
But it was
no
strictly
control over
along
that.
party lines. It got voted out of those two committees.
Well, look at how it got created, and I think this is a warning to how legislation gets created. If you go back to 2009, there was no Republican input. Not one Republican sponsored that
But the Democrats had a
legislation.
bigger majority in the Senate than
So
the
does that make it
Republicans
right?
have. I'm not saying it's necessarily right, but they got it passed. They squeezed and they got that 60. You will
and
need,
look at where
for
we're
big
at
chunks of
today.
this, you don't only need 51, you'll need 60 for phase 2 and phase 3 of this proposal. You think you're going to get that
I
in the
think
Senate?
it's going to have to happen. We have no choice. It's going to implode on its own. People will be without insurance because of the Affordable Care Act. And I have faith in our leadership because we've had hearings and meetings over the last year. They're putting this together. Look at what they did. They laid it out there for the American people to see this. They've advertised this. People have weighed in on it. Now you're going to have the reforms that are going to be done to it to make the needed changes. This is a work in progress, and I'll guarantee you it'll be read before it's voted on.
It'll be what?
It'll be read before it's voted on, unlike the last one.
All right. Well, it's much shorter, this version as well. Ted Yoho from Florida, thanks
Yes,
very
sir.
much for coming in. We'll stay in
Appreciate
close touch with you. Let's bring in another guest right now, Democratic Congressman Jim Himes of Connecticut. He's a member of the Intelligence Committee, but he's also following this issue very closely. Congressman, thanks very much for joining us.
Hello, Wolf.
All right, so the new Congressional Budget Office estimates that enacting the Republican legislation would reduce federal deficits by $337 billion over the next decade. React to that estimate, because a lot of Republicans are saying that's great positive news in cutting the federal deficit.
Yeah, well, you get that $337 billion because they're reducing subsidies to people to buy health insurance to the tune of $1 trillion. And so, yeah, when you throw, as you know, 24 million people off of health insurance, as the CBO has said that this bill will do, it's not surprising to me that you save a little money. Now, how my friend Ted is going to explain to his constituents who get thrown off of their health insurance that don't worry because the deficit will be stronger, or, I mean, my friend Ted comes from Florida. Another highlight of the CBO report is that the premiums on the senior population, the older population, are about to go through the roof. Again, said twice in the first 4 pages of the CBO report. I'm not quite sure how Ted explains that to his senior population in Florida. So, no, I'm not one bit surprised that the government is going to save money by throwing 24 million people off the health insurance. The question is that really how we want to address the deficit? And I think most people would tell you the answer to that question is no.
Shouldn't Democrats be in a position right now to do more to make this health care proposal better for all Americans? In other words, are you willing to go out there and tell the Republicans, let's work together and come up with a new plan?
Well, the Republicans need to live through what they're living through right now, which is discovering how politically poisonous some of the things that they've been saying and promising their voters for a very long time are going to be. Look, after today's CBO report, it's not clear to me that this thing gets through the House of Representatives. And I actually think this is going to have a little bit of a healthy effect on Republicans, because they're going to realize that what they've been saying for the last 7 years, and frankly what they've been saying right up till today, which is that Obamacare is a failure, is just baloney. Look, Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, has some issues. Ted's not entirely wrong. In the individual market and in some of the exchanges, we've got some real problems. So my hope is, and this would be a real win-win for the American public, my hope is that after they get, after they get shouted at the over, by their constituents over the possibility of throwing 24 million Americans off their health insurance, that they'll come around to the point of view that the Affordable Care Act did a lot of good for a lot of people, and it's got some problems that we ought to come together to fix. But as long as we're in the minority, which we are, these guys are going to need to sort of play out their fantasy that you can repeal this thing and make everybody better off. The president is going to have to come to realize that his promise that everybody was going to be better off, that you weren't going to kick people off their insurance premiums, weren't going to go up, that is just simply a fantasy. Until they absorb that, we've got to sort of sit in the sidelines and watch it happen.
All right, Congressman Hyams, there's more on the breaking news. We got to take a quick break. We'll resume this. Our special coverage continues right after this.
Aaron Burnett